Hi, and welcome to Pour Over Think, a podcast where we have our pour over drinks while we pour over things and purely overthink. I'm Mischief.
And I'm Sherigan.
And welcome to our second episode.
Ooh, second episode.
Only took ages, but we're here. And we're excited.
That we are indeed.
Today's a bit different than last time. We decided to look at something different. I mean, there's still text there. I was about to say it's a game, but then I realized we'd start a fight.
No, we don't have to start a fight over that. You can say it's a video game.
You can get it on Steam. It's Slay the Princess by Black Tabby Games. Some people might have heard of it before, other people might not have. So let me just refresh. Black Tabby Games released Slay the Princess October last year. They're known for a previous visual novel that was Scarlet Hollow. Black Tabby Games is by Abby Howard and Tony Howard Arias. Abby is usually the one that does the art. She's also a cartoon artist, she has a webcomic. The Last Halloween, she has other pieces of work, Crossroads at Midnight. They're all very nice looking, and you can also see all of that in their visual novels. Written by Tony Howard, and we really like Slay the Princess. What else is there to say?
We do. I think it was you who got me into it in the first place, wasn't it? Like, I think you recommended it to me.
I mean, honestly, it was a question I wanted to ask. How did you find out about it? And I was like, was it me?
It was you. Yeah, it was you, because you got excited about the voice actor who does most of the voices, which is
Jonathan Sims,
who we know for
the Magnus Archives.
Exactly, which you are a huge fan of.
Yes.
That's how it started. You got super excited about this project he was in and started selling me on it, and I think you gifted it to me as well. You did.
Yeah. Okay.
That's how that went. So thank you, because it got me down a very enjoyable rabbit hole. A rabbit hole big enough to make an actual podcast episode about. So good work. That's efficient.
I mean, I like all the voice performances. There are not that many, I guess, but we have Jonathan Sims, we have Nicole Goodnight, which does an amazing job as the princess, and we have amazing music, Brandon Boone, who did all of that, the composition. It's really good. Love it.
Yeah.
But yes, I heard Jonathan Sims. I'm a big fan of the Magnus Archives, as you've mentioned. I'm a big fan of his writing. I haven't yet finished 13 Stories, but it's really good, and I can also recommend that book. If you like horror, that's kind of important. And currently there's also the Magnus Protocol. There's some fun stuff.
Neat.
But yeah, I digress. I actually learned of Slay the Princess online. I saw it and I was like, I'm not sure. I'm not that big on visual novels usually. But I like the idea of it being a horror visual novel. And I got it and I didn't know Jonathan Sims was in it. And then I heard the voice and I'm like, wait a second. Wait, what?
Sold.
Immediately sold. So that was quite the experience. And what a rabbit hole it was. It actually got me to not play Baldur's Gate 3.
And that is saying quite something, people. I mean, I imagine a lot of people that would listen to this, hello future listeners, would have heard about Baldur's Gate and would be pretty hyped about Baldur's Gate, because who isn't hyped about it? For Slay the Princess to draw you away from that, I think that's a pretty good indicator for the quality of the work that was done here. But, you know, for the uninitiated, I feel like we should say a few more words about what Slay the Princess actually is and how it works.
Okay.
And so
I can start.
Sure, you can start.
You're on a path in the woods. On that path that goes to a cabin. And on the cabin, there's a princess. And you know, you're supposed to slay her.
If you don't, it will be the end of the world.
I didn't write the actual narration down, so I was just like, no, make it funny.
I noticed you haven't yet memorized it by heart, because come on, how many times have we heard it?
Oh, I've heard it so often. It's actually really good, but at the same time, you are a path in the woods, which is also a thing.
You are a path in the woods,
No,
yes, true.
That's an actual line in the game.
It is a line, I know.
It's like, there's a lot. There are
There
many
is a
ways
lot.
that the path in the woods exists.
Or doesn't, or maybe does.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah, that didn't explain anything.
But yes, there is a path in the woods. Essentially, this is a visual novel. It always starts with a version of what we just did. And the setup is very, very simple. You have a narrator that's telling you you are on a path in the woods. You're on a path. That path goes to a cabin. You're supposed to slay a princess in that cabin, hence the title, Slay the Princess. And in classic visual novel style, you just get to pick choices. you get to either go along with the narrator and be like, okay, he says I'm gonna slay a princess, so I guess I'm gonna do that. You can just do that. You can just straight up go to the cabin, pick up a knife the princess, and let it be that. But, of course, you have a lot of other choices that will branch off of one another and lead to very different endings, or as the game likes to say, there are no endings.
It's a love story.
There's also no wrong choices, so whatever you do, it's gonna lead somewhere. And that is intriguing in and of itself. I don't think I want to spoil too much on the individual routes right now, but the basic structure is that you always start on this path in the woods, or a version of it. You always go to the cabin, there's always a princess. You decide, do I slay this princess or do I help her escape? Something of that sort. That is all there is initially. And that is where the majority of the game happens. It's in this very limited set of locales and this very limited set of choices where you operate as the player. But these constraints, I feel like they work in favor of the game because they really force you to think about these specific circumstances, and they allowed the creators to really play with all the different ways a task like that could conceivably go, and it gets wild. Yeah.
You made a really good point. This game, I honestly recommend experiencing it for yourself with as little input as possible beforehand. It is a fun thing to experience for yourself. Fair warning though, this is a horror, psychological, emotional manipulation, whatever kind of, like, there are a lot of warnings and they're all on the website, so if there's anything that might be triggering for you, check that, which is actually really important.
Exactly. Please do that. If you are like me a bit and you're like, content warnings, I grew up in the 90s, I don't need content warnings. I watched like wildly inappropriate movies for my age when I was like 12. You will probably be fine, but you know, do make sure if you have any known triggers, check that out.
It covers a lot.
For me, I have to say, it was impactful, but I personally did not feel like I didn't get into the horror vibe on most routes. I don't think I was ever actually affected, like emotionally affected to the point where I'm like, oh no, this is doing something with me. It was more like, oh, that sucks. Or it was something like, that is really, really, really intriguing. I was just mostly driven by intrigue with this game. The horror bits were never actually scary to me, but I can imagine that it lands for people who get very, very immersed in a narrative. I can imagine this lands very, very well, especially with the added visuals, because Abby just does a fantastic job illustrating. It's so good.
I was about to say, I think most of the, weirder bits are the ones that are a bit gory. There are some visuals that if people don't like gore might be a bit much.
Yes, definitely. I agree.
So like there are certain elements and certain existential topics and stuff. Like there are things that could be potentially triggering for certain people, and I don't mean that in a mean way. I was struggling with certain routes myself, but that's just because I don't handle everything really well. And this game doesn't have spiders, so I win, but you know what I mean. It's like, I like that they give you the warnings.
Oh, definitely. No, it is a good thing. It is definitely a good thing that you have them.
Like, better safe than sorry, usually.
Yes, definitely.
But I do recommend experiencing it for yourself if you have the time and want to, naturally. And if not, just listen to us talk about it and gush about it. But this is like my last warning. I will talk about stuff in this podcast.
I will also say, while we're on this content warning bit, by the way, I just looked at it again. And what's really cool is there are chapter names in this game. The game will tell you, hey, now you're in this chapter, now you're in this chapter. These chapters have titles. And the content warnings on the website are actually by chapter. So when you get to a new chapter, you can check for that chapter specifically what is in it. And you could even use that as a sort of roadmap for like, okay, you know, if I get to this chapter, I don't know what's in it, I can look up, what is that? And I can go, oh, there's body horror in there. I don't really like that. I don't like depictions of being burned to death, so I'm going to skip that. Or you can do it the other way around. You look at the content warnings, you go, oh, there's this route, it has this topic in it. As soon as I see that, I know I need to be on my guard or skip that entirely. Which is a very neat way of making that content warning list, I have to say. It's cool that it's more usable than just a general content warning a la, oh, somewhere in there you're gonna see that, but we gave you no indication where, so have fun stepping on the landmines.
Yeah, but I also agree it isn't the worst horror piece that you've ever seen. It will not scare you forever. It's impactful.
Yes.
It tries to get you to think about certain things, and it covers topics and has visuals that might evoke something. They're not shying away from it, which I like. Basically, it's a beautifully drawn thing. I love the art. I love everything about this game. So good.
It is.
Yeah.
Right, I think we got the meta stuff out of the way. Where do you want to start?
I thought there's a lot of meta stuff in this game. I don't think we're done.
I mean, I know, but I meant the preambly
okay,
sort
sure.
of meta stuff, not the we're talking about the narrative in a meta way kind of meta stuff.
Okay, I did not deliberately misunderstand to make that point or anything, but that's good. Thank you. Now, how do you want to start? I mean, I guess I can ask.
What's the question? Yeah.
How did you go through the game the first time?
Alright, so the very first time, the problem is, the first time I saw the game wasn't my own first playthrough. I think I saw, after you told me about it, I think I saw Wellen's play through it on her Let's Play channel. Or at least I saw her starting it. I don't know if she's still doing the playthrough. And I watched her initial episode or two of the game, and she actually started with a route that you know quite well. She started with the Stranger. She got the Stranger on her first route. The Stranger is the route you get when you refuse to do what the narrator tells you, where you don't even go partially along with it.
We're not even going to the cabin.
The narrator is like, you're on this path, go to the cabin, and you're like, how about I just don't go to the cabin? And if you follow that through line of, no, I refuse to go to the cabin, you will end up at this particular route, which is one of the more out there routes that you get in this game. So that was my first route that I saw of Slay the Princess. So that was like, whoa, okay, this game can get trippy. And in a way, that was a really cool introduction, because this particular route gives you a glimpse of things to come. It gives you a very clear indication of, oh, this can go many different ways, and you don't fully comprehend what's going on, but you get a glimpse of many possibilities that could occur. And I think it's actually a neat route to see as the first thing in your game. And when I played it myself initially, I think I went about it in a very systematic way, because I already knew I wanted to map this out with as much detail as I could, so I wanted to go through it sort of logically to some extent. So the very first time I just went along with what the narrator said. I just went in, grabbed the blade, stabbed the princess with like no hesitation and all that. I just went for it.
Yeah.
And got what the narrator terms the good ending. And it's a very important distinction.
The good ending.
The narrator is the one who calls it the good ending.
I thought we were happy.
Because is it though? Like,
aren't we happy?
Those are the two things that I
Aren't you happy?
Aren't you happy? I don't know. Are we happy? The hero doesn't seem to think we're happy. Who's the hero, you ask? We'll get to that.
I was told I was happy.
Exactly, which I take issue with on a fundamental level.
I actually like that.
Yeah. Do you want to talk about it?
I did the same thing. When I started the game, I went with the good ending, basically. I didn't know about it, but I was like, okay, I know how I play these games. I never listen to the narrator. I play Stanley Parable and stuff like this. The narrator, He's a foil of mine. But I thought, well, before I do any of my usual stuff, I want to see what happens if I follow the rules before I never do so ever again. So I actually started with the good end, and it gets you to an ending screen and you go back to the menu and the game is over. So I restarted. And naturally, I did the stranger immediately. It was like, okay, it's over. I'm never listening to you ever again.
Polar opposite.
Exactly. And the stranger, I agree, is such a good way to start, but it's also a really good way to end.
Yes.
Because it gives you a good glimpse of it, but you don't understand. And if you've played through the game and you get the stranger at a later point in time, you understand.
It's like a capstone. It's either
really
a cast-off point where like, oh, I see, this could be interesting. Or it can be this thing that rounds things off. It's really nice. Go on.
I'm just gonna say, I had quite a tendency to not listen to the narrator. I started with the stranger, I got to the razor, I had the damsel, I had the prisoner, and I had the adversary. So it's usually something where you deny the narrator and do something else. And one of my best buds wasn't the hero, it was the contrarian. Who would have guessed?
Do we throw it out the window?
Oh, I did. I did many times. I have so many voice clips of myself where I'm like saying something's like, oh, I'm not gonna do that. And then the narrator goes, don't you dare. And then the contrarian goes, let's do it. And I'm like, yes!
Let's do it. Yeah, the voices are so good. So for someone like to kind of...
I kind of jumped the gun.
Introduce the concept, maybe. You have the narrator who's narrating the story, as a narrator should. But then you are in control of the character. You pick actions that are then going to play out. And alongside you, you always have one or more voices in your head that also give their opinion on the situation and make suggestions. And they are all archetypes of some sort. You always have the voice of the hero, who is your archetypical sort of good guy hero who does what needs to be done. And then depending on what else you do, what else happens, you have other voices that represent different archetypes, like the contrarian, which is pretty self-explanatory. He just wants to do whatever the narrator is telling you not to do. And yeah, you get a bunch of these voices depending on what you do, and they're all very unique and bring really cool twists to the narrative. Yes.
And they're all voiced by Jonathan Sims. Same as the narrator. So it's a lot of Jonathan Sims talking to Jonathan Sims, talking to Jonathan Sims, talking to Jonathan Sims, talking to Jonathan Sims, talking to the princess, which is Nicole Goodman.
Makes a lot of sense narratively, and I like it when it does that. It makes sense in universe that all these voices would be similar. It's so good.
It's absolutely fantastic and really good voice performances. I tried it. I can distinguish the voices really well. Absolutely fun to listen to. And I mean, I have a whole hierarchy on which voices are the best. And the hero to me is kind of like the protagonist. But at the same time, the hero isn't the one making the choices. We are.
Exactly.
And that's the fun bit.
It is the fun bit. It got me thinking, I'll give this back to you soon, but it got me thinking because usually when we play a video game, right, we have this interactive element. Usually the player is the hero, right? Usually you are the heroic one. You are the guy or girl or whatever in between who has to do the thing. You are the chosen one. And usually that is the hero of the story. Here we have an external voice of the hero who is not who's in control. And I thought that already a very interesting arrangement, so to speak.
I mean, I would still call it internal.
I mean, I get it because he's in your head.
Exactly.
Yes, of course. But it's not you.
Yes.
And I think we can't ignore that element of, hey, this is a game or a visual novel where there's a person behind the screen making choices who is different from this character in the game that is the hero. The two are not the same.
they're not the same, and it is important to note that they will talk to you, the player.
Yes.
The hero, the narrator, all the other voices, they will address you. They usually say, you're not the one making choices, he or they or whoever is, and it's always you. And even the princess in certain instances will address you as an entity that isn't one of the voices, and it's actually really good. It's such a good point.
It is so good.
You are part of this narrative, and your choices have an impact, and it's fun. And we still haven't talked about any of them. Well, the stranger, I guess, but...
Yes. It's wild
It's so
because, in a sense, you exist twice. You exist once as the you that actually is addressed by the voices and the princess in-game. You are acknowledged, but you don't have a voice, you just take action. But of course there's also the you behind the screen physically actually taking these, like making these decisions. And in a way you can't talk to them, right? You have your choices, but it's so good. It's so good.
I would kind of disagree though, because you have dialogue choices, and that is
I was
speaking.
thinking the same thing.
You can talk to the narrator, or like even... Okay, let's talk about the good ending. In the good ending, after you slay the princess, the narrator basically traps you in the cabin forever and tells you that you are happy with this situation.
Exactly.
And the hero is going on about how this isn't true, we're not happy. And as a player, you have the choice to say, but the narrator told me I'm happy. Aren't we happy? We're happy. Or you go, yeah, something is wrong, we're not happy, what shall we do? How do we get out of this situation? Are we defying it? Are we complying? And in these instances, you are speaking with the hero about this. The narrator hears you, but it's your choice to answer. So the choices can be a dialogue with just the voices that is internal, but it can also be you speaking to the princess, and in those instances where you're talking out loud.
Very much so.
There is this element, but naturally your choices are limited because you're only given a certain amount of them.
Exactly.
So, I mean, it is not... You can't just say everything.
Yeah,
you
can't like type something and the game will make something up for you based on what you've typed in. That would be insane. Imagine.
But a certain dialogue is allowed.
Exactly.
You
get
do
a
have
selection of dialogue, but you do get dialogue, not just actions. Yes, thank you for clarifying that.
Reminds me, fair warning about that too, like many routes include suicide, and I think
Yes.
like that one is kind of important to have a warning for.
Yes.
Now that I think about it, there are many ways that the hero, well, not the hero, but
you die
as a whole die due to our own actions and our own choices, because is it better to kill ourselves than dissolve in acid? Is it better to kill ourselves instead of being in eternal happiness? Like, there are many ways.
Definitely.
Death in that play? Oh god.
Since you brought it up, I think it's on a narrative sort of commentary level on how narrative is constructed. I find it absolutely fantastic that in the good ending, the narrator tells you you are happy, right? And chances are, like, the hero definitely doesn't like with it. The hero's like, wait, are we going along with this? Are we happy? This is bullshit. And you, the player, probably feel a little cheated as well. Like, it's...
That was the reward I was promised.
Right? It's a bit weird. It's quite unlikely that you are satisfied with it. And it's because the narrator is telling you, hey, you are happy. And on a meta level, obviously, one of the things that doesn't work in a story is if the story just tells you, oh, you are enjoying this. Like, no, the story has to do the work. It has to make me feel emotional investment and then has to pay that investment off for me to actually feel a certain way. It has to be constructed in such a way that there's build up towards a certain emotion, and then the catharsis happens and I feel emotional about that. But what doesn't work is the game or a book or any sort of narrative just flat out telling me, oh, this is how you feel. It's like, no, you haven't earned that. And that's exactly what the narrator does in that instance, which is why everyone's dissatisfied with it. It's brilliant.
I just have to ask a very general question. What are your thoughts on the narrator? Do you like him?
Do I like him? I find him fascinating. Let's just say that. Do I like him?
Because that is one of the questions the game asks you at the end. Potentially.
It's super loaded. Yes, and the thing is this. Oh, how do I talk about this without doing the whole spiel about my thoughts on the narrator, because I have so many.
I mean, I can give you my opinion on it in short, and you can build up on that or whatever.
Sure.
Because the thing is, I mentioned I love saying no to him. I love defying him. I love to get all the annoying bits out of it. But I still like him. I spent so much time with the narrator, I got every achievement, and even though we don't share any of our goals and we keep fighting, to me, he's kind of a friend. I do feel bad for him. I feel bad for the situation he put himself in. I feel bad for the situation that is happening. And I get some of his reasoning, which we haven't yet talked about. Mm-hmm. But at the same time, I'm like, but you still can't decide what I want to do. And you have to live with that. So, like, I like him. But
it's like, you gave us agency. Deal with it.
Basically. I can't hate him. Because he has so much character and he's fun, but he also can be such a petty, mean, annoying person. But at the same time, so can I be. And I'm like, I get it. So I think, like the contrarian, I would say, I just like to get on his nerves, but I don't hate him.
Fair. I kind of do hate him, and I kind of don't. It's complicated. On the one hand, I think in instances where he's like, you are happy about this, I'm like, hell no. I am not happy about this, thank you very much. Or the rare instances where he dares take away control from you. You know, not a big fan of that. I do think what he wants to achieve, he has a goal that we haven't talked about yet. I disagree with the goal. I don't think it is a goal worth pursuing, and certainly not a goal worth pursuing with the price that we are paying as far as the game is concerned. I don't vibe with that. I don't vibe with the idea that he decided this is what is best for everyone, and then just put that plan into motion to make it happen, presumably without, consulting anybody on the matter. He just decided, this is what is best for the world, and I will do what I can to make it happen. Yeah, that doesn't vibe with me very well. But of course, the narrator is the reason we are in this situation, and by extension, the narrator is the reason anything even exists at this point, as far as, the game's concerned. And, well, if we didn't have him, we wouldn't have a very cool adventure, so, yeah.
We wouldn't have the princess.
We wouldn't even have the princess. We wouldn't even have ourselves, technically. It's crazy.
I think that is a really good job on the writing, because I agree with you about why the narrator can be annoying. And I mean, as I mentioned before, I like defying him and I like not listening to him, and I was biased against him from the start. But at the same time, I think he's very well acted and he gets a lot across. He's actually a really interesting character. But what I thought was funny is when you mentioned when he takes control, he only gets to take control if you think he can. Which is basically the main theme of this game as well.
Yes.
People only have as much power as you think they have. If you think the narrator has enough power to keep you somewhere and makes you happy, if you think this is a possibility because he's the narrator, it will do that, basically. If you think he has enough power to stop you to do something, he will be able to do that. If you don't think he is able to stop you, he won't be able to. And that's actually really cool.
And the threshold for this sort of thing also varies. Like, if you are certain he cannot do it and you pick the corresponding option, he will not be able to do it. However, depending on the situation, if you think he might be able to, he might be able to. And the same applies to the princess as well. If you think she's dangerous, maybe she is. If you're sure she's not, she isn't. And the whole game is like that, and it's so cool.
If you know that the lady is a killer, you're in a bad spot.
To shards, you say?
Oh, behold, a perfect woman.
The perfect woman. Oh my god, yes. Nobody will get that if they haven't played the game, but that's fine. It's just building intrigue. I think before we dive more into the narrator and like the meta aspects of the game itself, why don't we talk about some of the routes that we enjoyed and maybe, designate what route we're talking about, obvious spoiler warnings for that route. We won't be talking about all of them, I don't think. And then,
I wish.
We can just pick a few that we want to talk about, do that, and explain them fully so that people can actually follow along. And by fully, I mean just the framework so that people get what's going on. So we can then talk about the meta level of things later. Does that work for you? Is that okay?
Sure, but I had assumed you wanted me to actually do like the transcript and read everything and do the voices and
Oh, you had all of that prepared, didn't you? Sorry.
Yeah.
Sorry.
I was so ready to be the contrarian.
We'll do our own like fan dub of Slay the Princess soon.
Are you the princess?
Of course I am.
Good. I want to be the contrarian. I can also be the narrator.
Yeah, you get to be the contrarian. That's good. That's good.
Oh, I can do the voice of the smitten.
That would be so funny. Who would I be most hilariously ill-suited to voice out of the entire cast?
Oh, what a question.
I know.
Maybe the cold?
The cold? I can do the cold. That does not...
I wouldn't say it suits you.
I wouldn't like to think it does.
I think cold and broken are like the ones that I wouldn't give to you. They're not your vibe.
That is very heartening to hear because quite often I do feel, like
Cold
a
and
vibe broken a little bit.
Honestly, I would also like to hear you smitten, just because it would be funny.
Oh, it would be so funny. Smitten is just a funny character.
The smitten is underrated.
Would you mind if I actually start it with a damsel bit?
Sure, go on.
Because this is the route where the smitten shows up, and I think it's not the most impactful route there is, but it is, I feel, one of the best executed routes, and it has some very neat metatextual commentary going on. So this is the route that happens if you load in, you either talk to the narrator or you don't, it doesn't really matter. You go to the cabin and you decide that you don't take the knife.
We never
that's
talked
on the
about
table.
that.
No, every time you go into the cabin...
How did we never mention the pristine blade?
What blade? No, we never mentioned it.
Exactly. No, that's the mirror. That's the mirror that we don't see and don't know about. But like the pristine blade, we never mentioned it.
No, we didn't. That's why I said, hey, we have to walk people through
Oh my god.
a route, because so far we haven't really done this.
The blade is your instrument.
You will need it if you want to do this right, exactly. So you go to the cabin, and
Yes.
whenever you go to the cabin for the first time, there is always a knife on a table, and you have a choice to either take the knife into the basement where the princess is, or do not take the knife. That's the second major branching decision after deciding to go to the cabin. Like your first decision is always, do I go to the cabin or no? And then when you do, the second decision is, do I take the blade into the basement or not? And then there's a variety of things that can happen. But if you don't take the knife and you go down there and you say, okay, I am gonna try and rescue this princess. I'm gonna try and do everything I can to make sure she leaves alive. If you do that, well, how much detail should I go into here? So, you don't take the knife, you go into the basement, and you decide, okay, I'm going to try and save this princess, even though the narrator tells me I shouldn't, because supposedly, we haven't even mentioned that. The reason the narrator sends you to slay this princess is because, according to the narrator, she will end the world. I think we did mention that at the beginning.
Yes, we
But
did.
that is the threat that is established.
She's dangerous.
And you can decide, okay, I don't believe you, you know, and especially you have a hero with you. He doesn't phrase it like that, but he kind of goes, wait, a princess, aren't we supposed to save those? In the very archetypical sort of,
Damsel in distress.
like the stereotype of the damsel in distress kind of deal. He goes, oh, aren't we supposed to save princesses rather than slay them? And you get the option to do that. And so if you try that, long story short is the narrator won't have any of it. At some point, while you try to free the princess, the narrator will intervene and will wrest control from you because he is so distressed by the notion that she gets out and actually ends the world that he takes control from you and makes you attempt to stab her. At which point, you can either give in and let him, or you resist. And if you choose to resist, the princess doesn't get struck by the blade, and she does realize that something is wrong, and you are trying to make sure she can leave, but something's come over you, if you will, and neither of you knows how long you can actually maintain composure without slaying her. And so
An interesting element there, though, is you get about 15 choices.
yeah,
A multitude of choices, as in you can just slay her, that's the only thing. But there's also the option to warn her or, like, again, give in, basically. It looks overwhelming and it looks like there is no out, but all of this is just window dressing. It's very simple to not do what the narrator says.
yep.
He just appears to be strong and in control, but he really isn't.
In fact, I would argue
Yes.
the very notion that he has to plaster like 15 options of slay the princess onto your screen to make you visually miss the option that says resist already speaks for how little power he has, because all he
Exactly.
can do is shout louder, proverbially speaking.
That was a very important one that you can find early on regarding, like, power of the narrator, but go on.
I would have added that later, but it's fine. No, this works. Yeah, this is what happens. In that moment when the narrator wrests control from you, there's about 15 choices where the outcome is where it just says slay the princess, and about one choice, exactly one choice, about warning her or resisting, depending on the exact situation. And I don't remember, depending on your screen size and resolution, I suppose, you have to actually scroll down to see the option of resisting him. So if you resist, you can't keep control of this forever, probably. The narrator's trying his hardest to make you stab her. She realizes this is going on and essentially decides, in a weird mixture of self-defense and compassion, to kill you.
And apologizes quite often.
Yes, she does. And it's
Brutal.
actually quite sad.
It's kind of funny how she is unaware how to handle a knife, so it just gets really messy as well. Like, they really make a point.
Wait. That is. I don't think that's in the. I don't think that's in chapter 2. I think
No,
that's chapter.
No, that's chapter 1.
Is it chapter 1?
Yes,
Sure?
because she keeps stabbing you, but she keeps missing the most important bits, so you slowly bleed out, and she keeps apologizing. It's also the one where she actually gnaws off her hand at first.
Yes, she does gnaw her hand off to get out of the restraints.
Yes, it's the difference between her and what will later turn into the prisoner. If you brought the knife first and then discard it and you save her, basically.
Right, this is chapter 1. The thing I had in mind is there are other routes where she also kills you for resisting,
The prisoner.
and she's very clinical about it. She's like, okay, this sucks, but I'm gonna stab you now. Sorry about that. And she just does it with surgical precision. Whereas the damsel is like, oh my god, I don't know how to do this. So I'm just gonna stab you 5,000 times and hope this works.
Poor thing.
Anyway,
Poor thing.
you die. And whenever you die, the loop starts happening, because of course there's a loop. Whenever you die, You go back to the beginning, to the path in the woods, but it's not the exact beginning, because you remember.
It's chapter 2 and not chapter 1.
And so do the voices in your head, of which you now have +1, depending on what happened, and so does the princess, but not the narrator.
Or does he? Sorry, I'm making things complicated for funsies.
Or does he? Yes. But no, I don't think he does. I think the narrator does, but the narrators don't. Anyway.
I would say the narrator is aware of the potential.
He's aware of the potential, yes.
He doesn't like to think about it.
He just doesn't want to think it happens. But we will get to that, I suppose.
I'm making things complicated because I can.
You are.
I'm sorry.
But, this is what we're here for. Making each other's life more difficult.
Oh, so you are the narrator. And I'm the contrarian.
Exactly. You are the contrarian. I'm trying to keep this on track. And this is actually exactly what's happening. I was trying to keep this on track and go through it in like a linear sort of fashion. And you're like, but also...
What if I threw it out of a window?
Exactly. So we are doing this very well on a meta level. I'm sure some people will appreciate that.
They're just going
Point being,
I get why they are the contrarian.
I have a big narrative vibe right now and I'm vibing with it. So, point being, the loop resets and you can choose to confront the narrator about that. You can be like, hey, we tried saving her and then you went and ruined it all, how dare you? And in the case of this round, the new voice that you get in your head in addition to the hero is the voice of the smitten, who wants nothing more than to rescue his beloved from the stinky dungeon and the unfair fate thrust upon her. And he's very verbose about it, he's very passionate about it, to the point that he even annoys the shit out of the hero, which is saying something. He's a very, very fun character to listen to. And so...
The hero was just surprised about how intense the love is that the smitten feels.
Yes, at first he was surprised, later he gets mildly annoyed if you explore the dialogue options a little bit.
I still think he's mid about it, but yeah, fair.
Yeah, probably.
The smitten can be a bit much.
You then go back to the cabin. And of course, again, you have, we're not talking about the mirror or the cabin at this point, you have the option again to take the knife.
There's a mirror?
Okay, never mind. We are talking about the When you get to a loop point, this is a chapter 2. When you get to a chapter 2, the cabin always looks a little different. It always looks the same in chapter 1. In chapter 2, the cabin looks different depending on what happened. And you still have the blade there in the damsel example. You still have the blade, so you still get the choice. Do I bring the knife and murder her like the narrator wanted, or do I not bring the knife? Do I rescue her? Well, do you have the choice with the knife? I'm not even sure. I think you do. Point being, you go back down there, and the smitten is smitten with the princess. She's also styled a little more damsel-y than she was before. She looks more like a stereotypical damsel. To some, she might look more feminine, more attractive in some ways. The smitten certainly is head over heels for her. And you get the option of actually rescuing her.
In the funniest way possible.
Yes. By just...
sliding her.
We talked about this earlier when you said that our thoughts shape what is possible. And do you wanna talk about that? How does it go? How do you free her?
Sure. The thing is, the princess is shackled in a basement. We never really mentioned it. We kind of implied it, but she's shackled in the basement, so she can't leave. And in the previous instance, we had to cut off her hand to get her free. And in this instance, while she doesn't mind the idea of getting her hand cut off, the smitten goes, we don't need to do that. You can just slide her hand out of the shackle.
Because it's so delicate and dainty. And then it's like, oh, yeah, you're right. And you can do it.
It works. You just slide her hand out. What an entrapment. Oh my god, it's so fun to me.
But it goes to show the damsel mindset of she probably never even tried to free herself, right?
Yes.
I will get back to that, I suppose.
and then you can deconstruct her.
Oh yes, you can. And the way the deconstruction happens, we're going to talk about that. But essentially, you get her out of the shackle by basically doing nothing at all because the shackle was a bad fit. And then you have the option to just rescue her and ride off into the sunset with her, proverbially speaking. And you can do that, and it has a lot of classical sort of romance visuals going along with it, of the stereotypical pretty princess being saved by the dashing hero, which in this case would be the smitten, who's very overbearing about it. And that can be the end. However, you have also the option to talk to her before you rescue her out of the basement, which is a mistake. Because when you do, you have the option of, well, okay, now that you're free, what do you want to do? And essentially...
Whatever you want to do.
Yes, thank you. She goes, what do you want to do? And whenever you ask back, her only answer is...
I want to make you happy.
I just want to make you happy. And if you've ever met the type of person in real life, there is hardly anything worse than a person like that. It's a personal gripe of mine. Like, oh my god, will that annoy me when people do that. It's like, no, you're not being nice, you're being so bloody difficult to handle.
I feel so bad for her because that princess is cardboard.
It is cardboard, and she literally turns into cardboard, which is why I chose this route, by the way. Not because I'm into cardboard, but because of what the cardboard represents. As you keep talking to her, and she keeps insisting that she doesn't want anything but make you happy, her appearance deteriorates. She goes from a pretty lady in need of rescuing to a literally flatter, more one-dimensional character, but also one-dimensional representation. The art changes in a way that she looks like a caricature by the end, which is such good meta-commentary on the damsel stereotype. I can't even. It's so good because the stereotypical damsel just wants to be rescued. She has no agency, she has no wants, she's just a device. She's just a MacGuffin almost for the hero to find or, to rescue. She doesn't need another function than
she's a prop.
Be pretty, be desirable, let yourself be rescued. That is the intended function of the damsel. And if you push the stereotype beyond that, the damsel doesn't know what to do because she was never meant to be more. So good how well this is represented in that. I love it.
When I went through the damsel stuff, I got there to this point and I was like, you know what? I'm not going to push it. I know what this is. And then she was like, okay, let's go. And then we left. And then the narrator tried to close the door on us. It's like, oh, you can't leave now. You're locked in. And then you, as the smitten, go, no, we can do this if we open the door together.
With the power of love.
With the power of love, we opened the door and we leave. And it was so funny.
It was so good. I love it. I love either of these outcomes. It's like so good.
I want to say, well, this is such a good smitten route. You miss out on not having done Thorn, which is a bit more complicated to reach.
Okay.
Because if you get to Thorn with the smitten,
yes,
there is one line that says it all.
All right.
The smitten basically says to the narrator, after having freed the princess in that route, he goes, well, are you going to describe our steamy romantic kiss?
Oh boy.
And you actually can get an achievement for kissing the princess. And the narrator actually narrates the kiss.
I have to ask, because the route is named The Thorn. Mm-hmm. Does the kiss stab you and murder you?
No. Honestly, the Thorn is basically a damsel route that has the damsel do things, because it follows the witch route.
Yeah.
So I'm just trying to make it quick. In chapter 1, you go in unarmed, you do not take the knife, and after you kind of free her, you slay her. So she feels betrayed. What happens is you then go to chapter 2, which is the witch. In that one, she doesn't trust you because, well, you betrayed her.
Makes sense.
And there are many ways that this can go, because every route has different routes and you can go on further. But what you can do in that one is you give her the knife and let her decide what to do. Basically, you hand trust to her by giving her the blade.
Oh, okay.
And if you call her beautiful, You also ensure you get the voice of the smitten in the next route instead of the voice of the cheated for getting backstabbed, basically. Because that's what's gonna happen, the witch is gonna kill you.
But you are getting stabbed either way.
You get stabbed either way, and then you get to the thorn, which is a chapter 3. We're gonna talk about what happens if you actually free a princess or kill her, like what happens then. But you reach the thorn, and you have multiple voices, and one of them, if you told the princess that she's beautiful, she will feel bad about it, because she's like, yeah, I stabbed you. Why don't I feel happy about that? It's basically like the last thing you see in that witch route. And in Thorn, she's entrapped in thorns. She's not just shackled by normal stuff. It's very Disney princessy if you think about it.
Oh, that's good.
It's like Sleeping Beauty, but actually like she's not sleeping and she is entrapped in thorns and getting hurt by them all the time, so she's quite bleeding as well. And you can decide to either stab her or free her or whatever. And this is basically building trust, because both of you have betrayed one another. Both of you know you have the capability of being mean and hurt one another, but you make the decision to free her. And this is basically the damsel in a very, I say, complicated relationship, and like her being a bit more complex. And then you free her, and if you have the smitten with you, it's all about, well, want to kiss her. So it's an interesting one. A lot of people really like Thorn because of that.
Yeah, sounds like a good one.
And I like it as a route, and I like it in comparison and contrast to the damsel in this case, but it's not one of my favorites. It's one of the last ones I did. But I have to admit, will you describe this our Stevie romantic kiss, and how the narrator answers with, I wish I could jump off a bridge? It absolutely is gold.
Shame there's no bridges in this cabin.
The other voices do well, and I should play more of it, but I was reminded of this because the damsel, while an interesting character, because you don't give her much, basically, because you assume she can't do much, there's not much there.
Yeah.
Which isn't the damsel's fault at all. It really is just a stereotype.
Exactly, and I think the interesting part, or the notable part about this route, is that it highlights the stereotype in such a way. Like, it does it really well. It does it really well by just emphasizing how diminishing this is, how much you lose when you deprive the princess of any agency whatsoever and of any real voice whatsoever as well. Which, yeah, I think it's good to showcase, as in, oh, this is what's wrong with just writing a damsel in distress without giving her any additional traits.
Treats. Here's a cookie.
Yeah, here's a cookie. I mean, she'd happily take it.
I think the Smitten in general is a very interesting character. His main route is basically the damsel, but there are many potential things that are really interesting that we haven't talked yet, which is also part of the damsel route.
For instance,
you can slay her.
Yes.
And oh no, is the Smitten angry that you did that? How dare you defy him? He kills us.
Yep.
He doesn't care what the narrator says. He doesn't care what the hero or you say. He's angry and he's forceful and he kills us.
Just kills us.
Which leads to another chapter 3.
Yep.
Which again is me not talking about what happens if you actually free a princess.
Nope.
I'm
Good
never
job.
doing this.
We're doing this fantastically. We're derailing fantastically all the time. It's great.
Hey, let me throw it out of the window, I guess. Whee!
No, but you are right, of course. If you decide to actually slay the princess in that instance, the Smitten is not happy about that. Will murder you, themselves, us, I suppose, and you get another reset and have to try for another loop. But we haven't talked yet about when you rescue the princess in any sort of fashion, when you get her out of the door of this cabin that she's confined to, something happens. Usually, she gets a moment of freedom, of appreciation for, oh, so this is what the outsides look like. And then an eldritch portal into the void opens and she gets grabbed by a couple of arms and disappears along with the rest of the bloody world. Well, I didn't see that coming, did I? And then you are also in the void, which, that's new.
And the narrator's gone.
And the narrator's gone, but the voices are still there. And it's all very, very peculiar. And
I think that's a mirror.
And there's nothing else, so, you might as well have a go and look at it and see what's in the mirror.
Don't do it.
But the voices really, really don't want to do that. They get really scared about the mirror.
Listen, the mirror looked interesting before when we didn't know it was there, but now that we know it is there and we can all see it, I don't think it's a good idea to actually go there. Like, just ignore it, okay?
Yeah, exactly.
I don't like it.
We don't. We approach the mirror, and as we do, the voices also disappear. Then it's just you, in the purest sense possible. There is no voice narration at this point, it's just text.
I mean, you look into the mirror, and it's you.
You look into the mirror, you get a reflection. Want to talk about that?
It's you, but depending on how often you did it, you look different, but it's you.
And you get a glimpse of what you look like, which those glimpses are quite rare initially. You don't really know what you are exactly. And I do not dwell on the appearance for now. What happens after you look in the mirror is you get the option to go to the cabin again, even though, as far as your perception goes, there isn't much of anything around. And you can go to the cabin, and there will be a being that looks similar to the princess, and specifically looks similar to the princess you just freed, because I said she gets grabbed by hands coming out of a void portal, and well, this is where the hands were coming from. And you can talk to this entity, and I don't want to get into what this entity is right now, since technically I'm still trying to describe how the systems work.
She or it, they?
Yes.
They tell you that they are looking for pieces of themselves, that the princess that you just met and talked to is only a part of a full being.
Yes.
But that they need you to get more of these pieces, and to do so, you need to believe that this princess has the ability to erase your memories and put you back to the start, so that she can actually do it.
Exactly.
You can ask her a few questions, or it or them, about what this is, if that being, that entity is the princess. You get some answers, but they're all quite vague, which makes sense considering that. You can ask about the vessel itself, about the princess that you've just met and what they represent, which is always interesting. And in the end, you can also agree that you get to be sent back and start anew. And you promise them to bring more pieces, basically.
And there's the rest of the game loop for you.
Exactly.
You now have a mission statement, which is follow more routes, grab more princesses, bring them to this entity until this entity considers itself whole, and then see what happens and hopefully learn a ton about the world, the princesses, and everything in the process. That is the promise of the game, essentially.
We forgot another very important line that is said quite often. Whenever we die, everything goes dark, and we die. And sometimes you hear some glass splinters for some reasons, I don't know why.
Yes, you hear some glass splintering.
Some shattering. No reason whatsoever, probably. Nothing to do with a mirror or anything.
No, why would there be a connection between a mirror and some glass happening?
Cannot imagine.
The glass we can actually talk about if you want at a later point, but I made a very conscious decision not to talk about these details because I was establishing the framework.
Listen in. We can also throw that framework out of a window.
Throw it out the window. Okay. It's okay, but here we are. I've hopefully explained the framework.
I'm here to make things complicated.
That was less concise than I had planned for, but it's fine.
I think it makes sense.
I hope everyone who followed along can still follow along. That is how the game works. That is what's happening. I should mention, just for convenience's sake, you have ample save slots. And you can save at any point in the game, like on any one line of dialogue, at any one choice, you can make a save file, and there is so many save slots that you can use that you will be able to very quickly jump back to points of interest, or like before a decision that's impactful, you can just make a save, pick an option, see what happens, and if you don't like it, or if you're just curious, you can just reload to the save you made and pick a different one. It's very, very convenient, very easy to navigate from that point of view, so you don't have to replay all the chapters all the time to see all the endings. You can just make a save whenever you want, and pretty much however much you want. I think you get 9 pages with 6 save files each.
You reminded me of one additional gameplay aspect. If you bring the damsel to her, like to the being, to this entity, and you actually return to chapter 1,
yes,
everything kind of resets, but you will not be able to do the damsel route again. This is going to be blocked out because you already brought this part, this perspective to the being.
Yes.
That being is not interested in getting this again. So you actually are locked out of this.
Yeah.
Or you do a new run, like a new save file.
This also happens with some other branching decisions where, imagine if you go a certain route, there might be multiple ways to get to the same end, but the path you take is slightly different each time. So you might have 3 paths that lead to the same outcome. If you have done any one of those 3 paths that lead to the same outcome, you are not only locked out of that route, but of the other routes that lead to the same outcome as well. So the game makes sure you don't repeat too much of the same ground at once, and even gives you an in-game justification for why the system exists. It's really very well done.
It is.
Right, so that was my piece about the damsel route and about how the framework of the game works. Do you have anything to add? Do you want to talk about a route that you want to talk about?
Oh, there's so much I want to talk about. I mean, I guess I'm just gonna mention the stranger first, because there's a fun thing you can do, not just with the stranger, but in general. If you actually get to a chapter 2, so you go through the first part of a route in the stranger, that would be disregarding the cabin and walking away until the world basically ends and you're put back to the start. Instead of going to the cabin, you can still not do anything. You can just not follow the plot at all. 2 people are going to be angry at that. The narrator and the entity. If you don't follow that, you can get an ending where, well, everyone's sad because you never did what you're supposed to, right? But I think as soon as you get 2 pieces to her, then you're locked in too, and then you can't do the other thing. You already set yourself on the path to
find these pieces.
So it's like an early decision that you can make to deny her, basically. And she goes through all the stages of grief. Or they, or it, or them. And it's like one of the potential endings. I wouldn't call it like one of the bigger endings. It's like the thing where you wait her out, because when you meet her, you can say, why can't I just stay here for eternity? What if I don't do anything, just stay here with you? And then the game stops, and when you restart, it's like, you've been only gone for mere seconds. Yeah, I waited for you. You weren't gone for long, though. And you get an achievement.
Also makes you question, like, who's holding the reins in this whole establishment? Like, who is calling the shots?
Considering where we are, it should be obvious, but at the same time it really isn't to us, which is fun.
Exactly.
It's lovely.
It's a fun little construct to think about. Construct. Oh god.
Yeah. But I mean, all of this was very vague, and I'm really sorry.
No, it's fine.
I would like to mention the voices, because we only mentioned the smitten so far, and the hero. But there are many of them, and basically with each route that you take, with each decision that you make that leads to a chapter, you have basically one main voice that gets added to it. With the chapter 3, it depends on other choices, and you can get a multitude of mix-ups. The voices that you can get is the voice of the paranoid, the voice of the contrarian, we mentioned him a few times, the voice of the broken, the smitten, the cold, the cheated, the hunted, the opportunist, the skeptic, the stubborn. They're all quite intense in their typing. And I mentioned it before, I really liked Contrarian, which is the main voice for the stranger route, where you don't follow it and you get to experience everything. We kind of mentioned that it was a good starting point or a good end point, but basically, if you do not go to the cabin, you've never met the princess, you don't have any expectations. She can be everything, because we don't know what she is. So what happens when we get into chapter 2 is we're in a place where there are multitudes of cabins, basically, like all amassed into one, because we never went into one. Every potential cabin is the cabin we get at. Every potential staircase, every potential whatever. So there's a multitude and an impossibility of what to do. And the voice that we have with us is the contrarian, who doesn't want to do what the narrator says, so it's a constant fight of what to do. And if you actually get down the stairs, if you go to the basement and you experience whatever the multitude is supposed to be and you don't know where you are anymore because you just lost yourself in everything, you meet a princess. And that's fine. But as soon as you start talking to her, she might give you 3 answers and she splits into multitudes of people. You hear the shattering. There is an additional princess, and the final choice is to do a multitude. You stab her, leave her, and free her.
All at the same time. It's not a choice.
Naturally.
It's layouted like it would be separate choices, but the only thing you can actually do is click everything at once. And so everything kind of happens.
I mean, the narrator is confused about this. Everyone's confused about it. And what happens is that the princess that we have ends up being an actual multitude of princesses. This is where the body horror warning came in for, because they're actually an amalgamation in the end. And we're not sure how happy they are about what happened to them.
They aren't either.
It was an accident. The contrarian feels really bad, and he has this beautiful line of, "I didn't think my actions had consequences." Which, yeah, fair. I didn't think so either, I'm sorry.
Mm-hmm.
The princess actually was everything in a very horrific way, because it wasn't intentional. It was just what happened. It's a very interesting one. And if you get it very early on, it basically implies that there's a multitude of things that could happen. And in your later routes, you're like, okay, no, I get it, because those are the choices you have.
Yep.
But if you get it at the ending, it's far easier to actually get how this amalgamation is actually built up. Like, you actually know or recognize parts of it, which I think is really interesting. So that is kind of like a quick way to the contrarian and the stranger route and why it's interesting.
Yep.
Has also a very fun visual bit where everything, like the cabin, the basement, also like deconstructed. It gets back to the basics, which a visual we will see at a different point in time as well, funnily enough.
Yep.
Which cabin are we actually at, right?
The answer to that question is yes.
Exactly. All the cabins. I like it a lot.
I was thinking as well, you said we don't know what the princess is. We have no preconception of her. Therefore, she can be anything. And because she can be anything, and she is what we think she is everything.
And also, she's a stranger, which is why the chapter's called The Stranger.
Yep. I think from a narrative standpoint, I was under the impression, so what's your... I'm going to give you my take first.
Sure.
Why does the fracture happen? Why does, when you refuse to go to the cabin repeatedly, at first, an extra cabin shows up where there shouldn't be one. And then if you keep going away from the cabin, you will eventually have this fractal of cabins where every path just leads to a cabin, as you described. And it is my understanding that this fracture happens in part because the narrator wants you to go to the cabin. The narrator wants you to end up at the cabin. And you keep refusing. So if he presents you with cabin A and you choose to walk away from cabin A, he basically makes you walk in the direction of cabin B. And if that process continues, they keep multiplying.
Yes.
And that stretches to the breaking point.
Yes.
There's other aspects that play into why this happens, but it is my understanding that this is one of the factors as to why this happens.
The narrator even says so, because he's like, oh, and there's another cabin, but that doesn't matter to you because you ignore it. And there's another, and then in the end you find a multitude.
Exactly.
So it really goes into this direction of he knows he won't get you to do so, and in the end the world ends. And which is why when you reach chapter 2, there's a giant wall, so you can't leave.
Yeah, right, the wall.
We forgot to mention the wall.
I'm sure it was always there.
Exactly. And while talking about taking or not taking the pristine blade, the contrarian decides to throw it out of a window.
We could throw it out the window.
So, like I've done with a lot of our structure in this podcast, we threw it out of the window.
We threw it out the window, the episode.
Exactly.
Oh my god,
there's a
episode
lot of that.
title right there. Oh.
No, it's just window dressing.
Window dressing.
So yeah, I have a very soft spot for the stranger also because if you do it as your first route, it will change other aspects of the game. Because again, these things matter. Your choice which path you take first or which ones you don't will influence the ending, which is cool.
Mm-hmm. Structurally, I will say this much. You can expect multiple endings, but also there's not like 15 of them. There's a handful of endings, but there's certain nuances. Let's assume, it's just an assumption, this is not the actual number of endings, but let's assume there are like 3 different endings that you could get to. There are still nuances to the paths, so depending on which princesses you brought to the entity, you will get different dialogue and different information, even if you go for the same ending. So there's an added incentive to see all the routes if you're curious about that sort of stuff.
The fun bit is, there even throughout the paths you have these potentials. I mentioned the thorn previously.
Mm-hmm.
If you make the choice of calling her beautiful, you get the smitten. If you don't, and you get betrayed, you get the voice of the cheated. So the dialogue in chapter 3 is going to be different.
Mm-hmm.
There are 2 ways you can do the den. You can have the skeptic or the stubborn as the additional voice in the 3rd chapter. And the stubborn wants to do a confrontation directly. And if you do so, you win, and you get an achievement, and you get like a certain ending. And if you try to run, you will fail, basically, because the stubborn does not actually put in any weight in that decision. He doesn't care about that decision to actually run away. But if you have the skeptic, in that instance, the direct confrontation doesn't work because that's not how he works. He would actually flee, and the hunted who wants to flee agrees with the skeptic. So if you have the skeptic in that one, fleeing works.
That's interesting. That's such a nice touch.
Yeah. So those are like minor variations that you get depending on your choices, which is why you can only kiss the thorn if you have the smitten. The cheated would not do that. So like, even if you think, oh, I've already done this route, depending on your choices, it's really fun.
Yep.
Did you do the razor? You did the razor route, right?
Yeah, I did the razor. Wait, what did I do? Razor or did I do No Way Out? I think I did razor.
I mean, No Way Out is part of
razor. Razor is chapter 2. Yeah, I did do razor. I did do both arms race and No Way Out.
Yes. Oh, so good. The razor is one where you fight, and like basically you kill her, but then you don't believe that she is dead. You go, nah, that can't be it. She must have an ace up her sleeve, right? There must be something.
Mm-hmm.
And because you assume that this is the case, she will do so and kill you.
Yay!
Because she had a hidden blade somewhere. We don't know where, but she had a blade and she killed us. And we get to chapter 2, which is the razor, and you get the additional voice, which is the voice of the cheated. Because, well, we killed her and then she killed us. Kind of unfair. And you will go to the cabin and you can decide if you want to take the blade with you or not. And depending on these choices, you get different voices. We get it. But the razor is a fun one because she's there. She looks very happy to see you.
Very indeed.
And she like, one of her texts is like, "Hi, I've been here for so long. I totally do not want to stab you. Why don't you get some closer to me?" Right? You want to free me. It's not like I'm gonna stab you.
Or anything.
Why would I?
Wink.
Wink, wink, nudge, nudge. Yeah, and you can do a lot of things, and this is one of those routes that takes basically ages to finish because you die quite often. Yep. Just fair warning.
You die a lot. And how does she kill you, and what's the connection to the previous chapter?
it's really fun because you can say, I don't trust you. You have a knife on you. And she takes her arms out and shows you that she has no knife in her hands. It's like, okay, I'm unarmed, right?
Well, no.
And you can have a really fun discussion there, and it's silly as hell, but she shows you her arms and there are no knives, and you talk to her and you ask questions like, wait, you killed me, and you can do this if you want. And after a while she gets bored, and then her arm splits
into a blade
and reveals that her arm is a blade. Alternatively, if you get closer, she will just stab you.
She is indeed armed.
She is armed.
It turns out when she was showing you her arms, she was also showing you her armaments.
No, I love the Razor. She is silly as hell. I love her so much. She's actually perfect.
No, that happens a bit later.
True. But there's this one bit, I don't know if you ever did that, when you see that she now has 2 blades. 2 arms, 2 blades, basically. Because that's already one more death that we have. You get choices how to react.
Yes.
I have to admit, one of my first ones when I did the Razor was, I was like, oh, she gets happy if she kills us, I kill myself, I guess. And then I got the Contrarian as an additional voice, who would have guessed? But what did you do?
All of them.
If you remember. I mean, you went through all of them?
Yes.
Did you flirt with her?
Yes.
How did you flirt with her? Did you give her the look?
Oh, I don't remember that detail. I didn't write that down.
Okay, no, because you get different choices, and one of them is like, give her the look.
Oh no, I didn't do that.
And everyone's like, what's the look? The narrator's like, what the fuck, what the look? And everyone's like, oh yeah, the look's so good. Because you need to know how to flirt without saying anything. So give her the look. And then, I mean, it works, right? Flirting with her works, but then she says, I mean, I'm still gonna kill you now, but now we have some homoerotic subtext behind the murder.
Now this has an extra layer of tension. You know, just gonna say this once. Some people are into knife play, so this can be both a trigger warning and a kink.
Honestly, the Razor is such a funny route, and if you go in unarmed, basically, you also get the Contrarian.
Right.
Right?
I think if you go no way out or arms race, one of the two, you actually do get the choice to throw the blade out the window, and then when you're back in the basement with the heavily armed princess, pun definitely intended, people will harp on the Contrarian for tossing the blade out the window. Exactly.
That was no way out. He's like, but whose idea was it? Not mine.
No.
No. Everyone knows it by now. It's been an hour, more than that, where I said that I like the Contrarian. He is so funny. He is me.
As in funniest characters, I think it goes, for me, the funniest character prize goes to the Contrarian and the Smitten. The Smitten is just so over the top. Good.
How would you rate the voices? I have a very soft spot for the Paranoid and the Skeptic.
The Skeptic's good. Skeptic's
really good. Oh, you did Prisoner too. Prisoner was a very good route.
Yes, I agree. Prisoner was good.
It's a very interesting one, because even though she seems apathetic, it has more to do with her having been trapped for so long.
Yep. And there's a different route that very starkly highlights what this cycle of potentially endless rebirths does to her. And it gets very, very dark. We can talk about more stuff, but I have to take a quick break now myself.
Sure.
I'll be right back.
Throw it out of the window? Hello.
This is your tier list.
Yes.
You fucked up. It's not a perfect woman. It's the perfect woman.
True.
But yes, cool tier list.
Now I'm trying to remember. Before we took a break, we talked Prisoner, basically. So I think we should just continue there. I don't know how to get back into where we were.
I think the last thing you said was literally, I have a tier list when I do a tier list. And I said, yes, but I have to go for a break first.
Oh.
I think that is literally where we left off. Okay, let's pretend I only just got back. So, you wanted to know what voices I liked the most. And you have in the meantime sent me a lovely little tier list of who you like the most. Why don't you talk about that a bit?
So you have time to think.
Like, who do you like the most? Why? What is your ranking based on?
I mean,
let's start with that.
I have to admit, it's a bit of a convoluted mess, and it's not like best thing because it depends on my mood. But I mean, I have I misspelled it, behold a perfect woman instead of behold the perfect woman, which is the razor. And also the dagger, because the dagger's also a blade. Blades are perfect. They're like a separate entity.
Oh my god, I didn't even catch that. That's fucking hilarious.
The pristine blade deserves it. Lovely. But I set up a ranking with like S, A, B, C, D. Makes sense. S tier, most of them. No. I have the razor. Her chapter 2 form. I have the Spectre, the Stranger, the Prisoner, Thorn, Adversary, the Eye of the Needle, and the Nightmare. And as the voices I added Contrarian, Skeptic, and Hero because I like them a lot. Those are basically the roots that I either did during my first run or kind of had something. I really like when the princess has character. Mm-hmm. She usually has a lot of character. She actually fights you. It's just, that's the truth. So that's kind of why the Razor, Adversary, Fury are all in there, and Thorn as well. The Nightmare is interesting because she has certain abilities. It's one of those instances where you don't trust her and think she has abilities that go far beyond just having a blade, and well, now she does. She is really interesting, and I think it's one of those routes that you should experience for yourself, so I don't want to say too much about it. Mm-hmm. But I love the design, I love the way they set her up, I love the way she was handled and the whole route was handled, and it really gave the Paranoid, which is basically the voice that goes with her, a really interesting job as well. Like, it's a very interesting dynamic that is there. I really like this. The Adversary is tied with the voice of the Stubborn, and they really work well together. Mm-hmm. They have interesting conversations and you get far, but it's a lot of they're here to fight. They don't care about what is going on, they don't care about anything. It is all about the fight and about winning it. Which, if you know what kind of games I play and what type of character I usually enjoy, I love my rivalries. Persona 5 is calling. Gore somewhere is like ready to fight me. Throw his glove at me. Like, that's just, I like that vibe. Same with Thorn, with the building of trust and mistrust. The Prisoner and the Skeptic are like a good duo as well. A very interesting dynamic. The Stranger is just fascinating. And the Spectre? You mentioned it before, you have a lot to say about that too, so another reason why that one is really high up on my list. Mm-hmm. My S list is basically either I like them for what they have to say, mm-hmm. or I just really like the vibe they have with the respective voices that we got. Mm-hmm. And with the voices, I overall like whenever the Contrarian shows up. I wonder why. The Skeptic, same reason. The Skeptic mistrusts everything the narrator says, like, we vibe. Mm-hmm. And the voice of the hero, because he's so good. The voice of the hero is so interesting because he is basically the neutral one. He tries to get it, he tries to understand, he tries to ask questions. Absolutely deserves S tier.
He is the hero, if you will.
Yeah. And then I have like my A tier list, or like the Damsel. And again, with the Smitten, it's just a fun route to go through. The Wraith, which is an additional form that the Spectre can have, or also a form of the Nightmare, depending on which chapter you get. We have the Witch, which is what leads to... Witch leads to Thorn. Also very fun. Also a very fun, interesting bit with the Scorpion and the Frog achievement. If you know the story, you know. If you don't, well, you'll find out. We have the Networked Wild and the Wounded Wild, which are just very interesting in how they're presented and what they represent, basically. There's a lot with it and how you can get there. And it's another really fascinating path I really enjoy. We have the Morning Grey, which is different than the Burning Grey. I prefer her slightly. just with the setup.
Yep,
And
same.
I think I have the normal princess as an A tier too, because she's cool, but we never know, you know. And from the voices, I usually have stubborn, smitten, and paranoid, because they're just really good and I like them quite a lot. B tier is beast and wild, or well, then I guess. Then another grey, the burning one. Then we have the deconstructed damsel, she's interesting, but what a trip. We have another form of the nightmare, which is really interesting, but she just doesn't get as much in the spotlight, and it's a lot more about what's surrounding us that is important, so I put her a bit lower. With the voice of the cheated, hunted, and the cold. I like them, but I don't vibe as much with them. The hunted is very interesting, but I'm not as big a fan of his roots than the others. The cheated was fun with the razor, but as soon as I got to know the others, it just didn't vibe as much, because he is very... And she betrayed me, and she did that, what a backstabbing mean one, and I just don't like being here. And I'm like, yeah, after a while you kind of heard it, but he's a very interesting one to get early on. But I feel like as soon as you get the others, you kind of go, yeah, sure. And the voice of the cold is interesting, because that's usually the one that you have when you slay the princess. Or you kill yourself, because it's just what you do.
And murder leaves you emotionally stunted.
For me, this is just B. C is voice of the broken and opportunist, just because I don't vibe with them. And I have the narrator there, just because, I mean, I can't have him high if I like the contrarian. So they're all C tier. And I have all forms of the tower, basically. So apotheosis and fury is in there. I think I called the Eye of the Needle Fury before, but they're not the same. Apologies for that. So Eye of the Needle is good, Fury is lower. I just really don't like their vibe that much. I know some people really like that one, but yeah, she has like a very domineering vibe, and I know some people like that, but to me it was a bit over the top, and I really didn't vibe with it, and the voice of the broken didn't help at all.
The voice of the broken certainly did not help.
I did not consent to this BDSM scene. I want to leave, please.
Yep. Though that is not to say the voice performance of the broken in those scenes is bad. It's very good, actually, but, you know.
Absolutely good performance. It's just, that's what I meant earlier with, I don't really vibe with these kind of things that much. And it was a bit too much for me, because I didn't really expect it.
Yeah.
Apotheosis is absolutely worth it. It's very interesting. Like, all the roots, you get so much out of them. But I was uncomfortable going through it, and I was like, yeah, no, that's not my stuff.
Yeah,
and on the lowest tier, I basically have the entity.
Yeah.
I have to admit, I fell for it in my first playthrough, because I just wanted to see the ending. Same with, I follow just what the narrator said and do the ending that they kind of offer you. So this is kind of why she's there. And I didn't really go through all the potential things until later. But I just feel like the entity doesn't offer us as much, and I mean, she's named, if I'm allowed to name drop her, the Shifting Mound. I just don't vibe with her goals either. It's like the narrator and the Shifting Mound. I'm just like, no thank you. I guess that's the contrarian in me again.
I suppose it is.
I honestly, like, this is a weird tier list, because I like them all. I like them all for different reasons, but I have certain favorites just because I like it when you get characterization, or you have like all these meta elements where you just go, oh, this is narratively speaking very interesting, and what are you giving me here? So there's quite a bit, and it's just interactions between the characters that really sell it, and that's basically why the Shifting Mount doesn't get much, because she only explains and expositions you a lot, at least for the most part, and why the narrator is C tier, even though he has some really fun lines, and which is why the tower is rather low in comparison to everybody else. That's a very quick run through. I hope it was kind of easy to follow.
Yeah, kind of. We might.
Kind of.
Yeah. You might want to link the tier list, I think.
I'll put the tier list in the episode, and yours too if you have one, certainly.
That was interesting, yeah. Thanks for walking me through it. I agree with a lot of these choices. To me, the form of the nightmare that you put in B tier is S tier.
Oh, I mean, fair. I was considering it.
To me, it's up there in S tier, and same with the, for me, like the damsel and the caricature damsel both belong in S tier as well. Like, It's simple, but it's executed so well that I'm giving it an S just for the execution.
Fair. I just thought they don't give me as much, therefore they're lower tier. But you're right. I get your point.
Same with like the narrator, I'd rank him higher because just because of what he does and what he represents. And when I think about the narrator as a character, I think about the construct of how the game is framed, right? And it just does that so well that I'm like, yes, however much I might dislike the character on a relationship level, the execution is just so good to me that I have to be like, okay, yeah, to me this is an S tier. So like my ranking of these would be more based on how interesting do I think they were. In this game, that happens on 2 levels for me. One is the interpersonal level, like how much do I like interacting with this character? How interesting do I find this character? And in the same vein, there's the other aspect of how interesting do I find this from a meta standpoint? Like, what is it actually saying? How much is it intriguing me in terms of what this narrative is, what it's trying to do, how it's constructed? Those are like the 2 lenses through which I view things.
If I were to do that, everything but the shifting mound would be S tier.
I mean, that's fair.
I really went with what do I like, and some of it was also just design choices. I liked Morning Grey over the Burning Grey just because I liked the design better.
The vibe, yeah.
I mean, both of them have their reasons for why they are the way they are, and I really like those choices. But also I saw the Morning Grey first, and I think the Drowning one just had more impact to me than the Burning one because of that, because it was a repetition of something I've seen. With the Nightmare version that I put into B-list, I was like, she had so much character in the first form because that was more about this, and in B it had a lot more to do with, again, everything surrounding us and that what happened basically. I don't want to go into too much spoiler territory, and that just didn't give her as much anymore.
I find that interesting because I'd almost argue the opposite. Sure, you get less direct interaction with her, but I might be wrong about this, but I think it's that route where you get a sense of what the loop does to her.
Certainly.
And it's not direct characterization, as in you don't talk to her about it, you don't hear it from her.
Yeah.
But you essentially get a glimpse into her psyche, and getting that
is true.
in the form that you get it, I'm not going to spoil too much, but getting that in the form that you get it is so valuable in the broader context, and it's so well done artistically that I'm like, yep.
It's done so well.
This is the shit I'm here for.
This is why I want to make a video about this or talk about it or do anything. Like, it was really what sold it. I absolutely agree. I really was just going, I don't get as much interaction directly because I was like, do I like her? And I went with, what did we talk about? And it's like one of the reasons I like the Razor so much, because you get so much interaction out of it. But yeah, it's I do agree that she probably deserves, she could be placed in a higher tier, but I was doing this trying to go, you can't put everything into S tier.
Yeah.
So
either the hottest or the lukewarmest take of them all, or the coldest take of them all is, I agree, the entity is the least interesting bit.
Yeah.
Like, they serve a purpose, and it makes sense, but it's by the very nature of her or them, it's the bit that you can connect with the least, and I feel like you really feel that. And in a way that's good, because that's what she's supposed to be. You know, she's supposed to be different and in a way unknowable. So, yay. But she's not doing it in the most interesting way or in the most engaging way, where I'm more drawn to more of the other route, like more of the routes, more of the individual characters that comprise her whole in the end, rather than the completed entity herself.
I mean, this is basically the fun bit, because the entity is like, oh, I'm an amalgamation of all the princesses, all the aspects that you brought me. And I'm like, yeah, but the stranger is all of them. She's cooler.
Yeah.
It's like, apologies.
She's you, but kind of cooler, actually, and less condescending.
Yes.
Much less condescending.
More down to earth.
Oh my
And you
god.
have
Oh my god.
apotheosis.
Hang on.
Oh?
The mount is literally full of herself.
But now I'm like, you know what also is interesting?
What?
We have the networked wild and the wounded wild. Have you done these routes?
No, you'll have to walk me through them.
You can reach the wild through a multitude of choices, so you have a multitude of voices. You can have the opportunist, paranoid, cheated, or stubborn, or you can just have only the hunted. You can have the hunted, the broken, and or the opportunist, stubborn, or the contrarian. Like, there are so many ways to get to these, which is already fun. But basically, you had an interaction in your chapter 2 that led to death. And depending on how you get there, you have different voices. But in the other one, the chapter 3 starts with the princess narrating.
Oh.
She goes, "We are a path in the woods."
Now, isn't that interesting?
And you have a narrator that is very confused about that, because no, you are not a path. We are on a path. That's different.
Oh my god, and
that's
she
not the
says
same.
we.
Who's talking? Why are we here?
Oh my god, yes.
We. Basically, I'm gonna spoil a bit of it, but I'm not gonna spoil the ending. But whatever we did in chapter 2 caused us to basically die while being in some form of connection. I say in the witch one, we were both strangled to death by vines. Or if you go through the den, you were eaten and digested inside of her.
Alright.
Which means that in the new route, in that chapter 3, we are together.
Thus we
Because
are
we
a
died
path.
together.
Yes.
We are a path. So we are currently experiencing everything and see a lot, and we try to find our way. And we're not angry at each other anymore, because being together is nice, right?
Gives you a sense of understanding.
That's what we want. And it's the narrator, and depending on whichever voice you have, maybe the hero or something, that will argue, well, wait, weren't we angry? Weren't we just eaten? Aren't we angry about this? No, I don't feel anything. Like, it's nice. And you can kind of decide if you want to return and separate, or stay together, united, which is again why you have a wounded wild and a networked wild, so you can see how the routes can go there. But this is one of those that gives you a lot of text, depending on which voice you have, and different reactions towards what you see, which is again these variable, like smaller minor variants that you get, which can lead to a lot of knowledge that you get through this one route, basically. And I remember when I played it for the first time and I had the princess narrator, I was like, how can she do that? And it was because she was one of the voices inside of us, because we were one. And that's actually really interesting. It was fun. But she wasn't herself. And neither were we, because we were both muted, because we were both
So
a weird mix of it. And it is one of those routes that is actually same as the stranger. It works well if you get it without knowing anything, but it's really interesting if you already know certain things, because you recognize elements, and that's the fun bit.
That is super cool. I have to play that.
It's so cool. Generally, every time when I thought, now I get it, now I have it, now I have the route that shows me whichever I want. I thought at first it was the racer, because you get all the voices. I was like, this one is very cool. And then you get to the nightmare, which I absolutely adore, which we both mentioned before about how interesting it is. That does so much.
Play the nightmare. Play all of the nightmare routes. There's different ones. Play all of them.
And then I did the tower, and I was like, I don't like the tower, but then you get so much out of it, and it's like every route gives you bits and pieces that are just so good. And oh yeah, it was because part of a whole, I was like, how did I get to the networked wild? But it was like the idea of like this being together, being better as something new, which again aligns with the goals of the shifting mount, even though you don't know, right?
Yeah. And like, it's one of these instances where the game is actually about the thing that it does. Like, it's almost performative in that sense.
It's so good. I actually recommend it.
You are tasked with bringing these pieces of herself to the mound or to the entity, just so that she gets hold and she gets new perspective on the world and on what she is. But at the same time, by doing that, you as the player gain new insights and perspectives and a greater understanding of the whole. So it's really perfect ludonarrative assonance where what you are doing gameplay-wise and what the story is telling you to do, it just matches so damn well. It's so well executed.
This game, it's so good. It's so good. But you wanted to talk about the Spectre, I heard earlier.
Yeah, so before we talk about the Spectre, I just want to point out, this is a route where I absolutely will go off, and I cannot not talk about certain things that are very, very important to the overall structure and plot of the game, but they are also very impactful to experience for yourself. So consider yourself warned for this particular route, and consider yourself warned that I will talk about meta aspects of the game, and I will be talking about what the narrator is, what the voices are, why and how they exist, that sort of thing, which is both very cerebral and also quite integral. So if you don't want that spoiled, be aware. I will say that again before I go into the actual bit about that. First, the route that led me to wanting to talk about this is the aforementioned Spectre. Essentially, this route happens if you go in, you do as the narrator says, you kill her with no hesitation, and then when you're at the point where the narrator is, accept your reward of eternity in this cabin floating in the void.
You're happy?
You are happy. The voices and you go, no, screw this, and you kill yourselves. Because you do that, the loop resets, and you've already killed the princess, but the loop is still reset. So when you go to the cabin for the next time, you find her corpse in the basement.
It's even funnier because the pre-discussion is like, the narrator tells you to kill her, and the voice of the call goes, she's dead, we killed her. She dead.
Yeah, we killed her, what are you talking about?
There's nothing we can do. Trust me, bro.
And the narrator doesn't believe it, as he usually does when like there's extra voices and you tell them, hey, we've actually done this before. The narrator doesn't believe it, but the other voices keep insisting, like, no, we killed her. And then the narrator basically goes, well, but then why are you here? Like, if you succeeded, why are you here? And that's when you can tell him, well, you saw fit to lock us up in a cabin for eternity as a reward, and we didn't like that very much, so we offed ourselves.
Thus ending the world.
And the narrator is none too pleased with that and basically points out that we really shouldn't do that. Yeah. And then when you go to the cabin, she's there in the basement as a corpse, and for a moment it's all like, okay, interesting, there's the corpse, see, we did kill her, what are we gonna do now? And then her ghost starts floating up through the floor.
And it looks lovely.
And greets you in a very nice, heya, killer, sort of way.
I love that nickname. Hiya, killer.
The way she says it is brilliant. And you'd think she'd be like super vengeful about things, right? Since we did kill her and her soul is still lingering. But this is actually one of the instances where you can have a very in-depth conversation with her about things, and she's not super mad about things. She's obviously not thrilled, but she's not immediately out to get you, which I thought interesting in itself already. And essentially, you end up having a few choices, and it boils down to, does she end up killing you? Or when she suggests, hey, listen, you're here, you killed me, that wasn't very nice of you, I still want to get out, I could maybe hitch a ride in your body. If you go along with that, that's the bit that interests me at the moment. You can say, okay, you know what? I did an oopsie. The narrator convinced me to do this. Obviously, he wasn't I wasn't happy with how things ended. Obviously, there's more to this. I'm not really trusting the narrator at that point. I'm gonna let you hitch a ride. Let's get out of this cabin together.
That one is also very interesting just for the premise, because considering she's dead and a ghost, she isn't shackled anymore. She could leave, right? But she tells you she can't.
Right.
She tries, but she can't.
Exactly.
She needs someone else to get her out. And I don't want to go too far with this because we're talking Spectre, but this is an instance that happens in many of the routes where it's she has the means to escape, but she also can't.
Yeah, she
needs
after
you.
she kills you, you would think there's nothing stopping her from actually exiting the cabin if she's free. If she's been freed from her shackles and she successfully murdered you, what's stopping her, right?
Something is.
Turns out she can't leave without you for some reason.
Which is also, by the way, why you get digested, because she wants you to take with so they can leave, but that's a different one.
She's had you for takeaway, literally.
Just because you mentioned the hitch a ride, I wanted to give some context of she needs you.
No, that is an important context bit as well, yes, I agree.
She needs you and she thinks, well, that's one way to repay her.
Exactly, that's one way you can do her a kindness, basically. She's super not vengeful about it, because you can be hey, when you do hitch a ride, do I get to be in control? Do I get to call the shots still? And she goes yeah, sure, as long as I get out.
I mean, she has instances where she kind of morphs a bit and you can see that she's still angry at you, but she's trying to give you a second chance.
Yeah, she's legitimately trying to give you a second chance before resorting to more drastic measures.
Yeah.
Exactly. And if you deliberate this, obviously the narrator's against it. The narrator's yeah, no, we really shouldn't let her do that.
Kill her again.
Yes, murder her again. And then we have the different voices that
The cold is indifferent about it, if I remember correctly.
are interested in what this would entail. And one of them essentially says that, hang on, if she possesses us, does that mean she could hear the voices?
And especially...
Could she hear the narrator? And, well, if you consent to this and she possesses you, she does indeed hear the voices.
I think I remember. I mean, she is the one that separates you,
Exactly.
you, and whoever is with you, right? And the narrator. She recognizes that the narrator isn't part of you, but is there.
Exactly.
Which is an important point.
Mm-hmm. It's very, very important.
Does she call him an echo? I think she does.
Yes, she does. I'm trying to find the exact wording. Yeah, there it is. So, when she possesses you, the voices ask her, hey, so do you actually have a narrator as well? Because we have a narrator, do you have one? And she says she doesn't have one. And in regard to the voices, she says, all these shards of broken glass on the floor, are they also supposed to be you? And she's addressing you as the being in control. And she remarks, like you said, that the narrator is different from these voices and says she can tell that he doesn't belong, that he's barely there, the shape of something left behind, more a memory than a person, kind of like me, actually. That's what she says.
So many good princess narrator conversation bits.
Mm-hmm.
they hit every time.
Right. And we have mentioned in passing before that there is a mirror sometimes. And that whenever we die, you hear the sound of breaking glass.
And everything goes dark, and you die.
And so here, this line where the princess says, hey, there's shards of broken glass on the floor. Are these shards supposed to be you? To me, this is where the spoilery meta stuff comes in. This is where I was wondering, does that mean the shards represent the voices? Are the voices the shards of broken glass? And if so, does that mean they are fragments of us?
Interesting.
Because when we die, we hear the splintering sound as well, right?
Yes.
So is it like literally a piece of us that breaks off? And then depending on which pieces we have with us, because according to her, there are physical shards of glass that we never see. Right? We can't look down at the floor and see the shards. They are never visually represented in this moment. And so I'm wondering, is that what's happening? Are these shards of us? Are these the versions of what could have been or what we were, right? Because they always appear after we made a certain choice, after we went down a certain route. So are they the shards of glass? And she does establish that the narrator is different. So it's all very, very interesting. I want to stay with the voices for a moment before we move on to the mirror.
I was thinking of the shards of glass and what they represent, because to me, because I got to this bit after I finished my first round of the game, so I already had like some of the like revelations. To me, I kind of saw them as potential realities or potential versions of us. So like
exactly
your idea with the fragments, like I kind of agree, but I also disagree with them just being directly the voices, but like just a different variant of us, basically, which is why I also assumed, just to kind of like, I'm not talking too much about the mirror, but to get back to this, which is why I assume we see the mirror, basically, that isn't there. Because that would be one of those shards, so that the mirror itself is only a piece, which is why it doesn't really exist. I think this is like the closest we will get to that, but I don't know. They're not the same in my mind. The mirror that we see but the narrator doesn't is basically that fragment that will break, is like, that's the piece that breaks.
That's interesting.
When we die. Like, going in that direction.
That's interesting.
I haven't really a like great thesis or theory ready. It was more like, it makes sense that we see that mirror, and that might be the thing that breaks, because this is also just, again, a fragment of the bigger thing.
Can you walk me through real quick just why is it that we see the mirror? So you say you're of the opinion that we see this mirror.
Yes.
It's not the same as the other mirror that we haven't talked about yet.
I mean, we mentioned it before.
You say that the narrator does, like, you are working from the assumption that the narrator truly does not see the mirror.
Yes.
What makes you, like, how did you come to that conclusion? Can you walk me through it?
Sure. We mentioned before, if you go through a path, you get this portal, a princess goes, and we see that mirror, like the big mirror. And this is where the voices get afraid. And usually you have different choices. You can either say, hey, it's going to be fine, especially in like second routes and stuff, because you know what is behind the mirror. You can tell them, nah, it's going to be fine, we'll meet again. Or you can be like, yeah, it doesn't concern you, whatever, fuck off. That's kind of the vibe that you can go for.
Yep.
After you go through the mirror, you are in this very empty place, in this very empty spot, and then you go to the cabin, and this is where you meet the entity. But to me, this mirror, this big mirror at the end, has more to do with us as a being. So like, that's also why it's able to actually reflect us. It has less to do with the shifting mount or the narrator. They both barely have anything to do with it, in my personal opinion. Which is why when we see it in chapter 2, when we see a mirror in the cabin, I don't think the narrator sees it, because this is basically us seeing ourselves. Even though we can't actually see the reflection, this is the closest we get to seeing us before the end. To me, the mirror breaking, or like this shattering glass, at first I put it too closely together with the narrator due to his whole situation, but kind of placed it with, no, the voices are afraid and they cannot go beyond the mirror. So us not being able to see ourselves within the chapter makes sense, considering the voices never get beyond the mirror. So the mirror vanishing to make sure that we keep the voices, basically, you know? It's like, yeah, it's there, it's an awareness.
But why does the mirror vanish? What's making the mirror vanish?
I would say the fact that we are unable to continue and learn without like going further, because the mirror is usually the barrier that leads us to the other place. Like, this is the closest we get to ourselves. So us wanting to reach for that makes sense, but also there would be nothing there for us because we don't understand.
Counterpoint to that would be that the mirror does not always block you from entering the basement. Sometimes it's just also on the wall.
Oh no, I'm not saying blocking the basement.
Oh, you're at the end.
Yeah, the mirror at the end leads to the empty place. And the mirror in the cabin sometimes would lead towards the basement or is on the side. It's just it's within the room. And to me, this is the potential of self-recognition, basically. But we are not ready for this because the voices never manage to go past this. So we ourselves are not ready to look at ourselves. So we see the mirror, but we also cannot interact with it because we aren't ready, because we do not understand. So this is basically a self-inflicted thing. And I don't think that either the Mound or the narrator have an influence on this. This is the closest we get on self-reflection, considering that our death is a mirror shattering.
Okay.
And basically the shifting Mound forces us to confront ourselves, to talk to her, basically. But it also forces us to leave parts of us behind, because the shifting Mound doesn't care about those parts, doesn't care about these experiences for us. They do not matter. It doesn't care about the hero, smitten, whatever. They care about us, the player, which is different. And for us, again, it's our decision if we care or don't care about the voices or the princesses, the aspects that there are and stuff. And this is something that we will then see in the ending. But those are like bits of self-recognition and stuff like that. It's a very convoluted mess. I am not sure it makes sense. But this is kind of how I read it.
It did make sense to me at the start. I have a different conceptualization of it all. I was thinking that the mirror, in a way, isn't just a mirror, but I'll get to that. My concept of why the voices disappear, or like why and how they disappear, is slightly different. To me, I was thinking, when you approach the mirror and the voices disappear, right? The mirror is whole. In those instances where we approach the mirror with like just ourselves and the voices, we never see a fracture in the mirror. The mirror is always whole. Yet the spectre insists there are shards of broken glass on the floor. And whenever we do approach the mirror and see our reflection, the voices and the narrator have disappeared. So I was thinking it's sort of like, it's going to sound stupid, but it's kind of like Schrodinger's mirror.
Oh, okay.
Where the moment, like we have all these possibilities, we have these shards that make up our being, these versions of ourselves that we could be, right? The smitten, the paranoid. Those are all the voices that could be in the driver's seat, but aren't. We are in control, ultimately. These are aspects of us, fragments of us, and they are part of us, right? We have a skeptic inside of us that's like, really? We have a contrarian that wants to go, fuck all this. We have the smitten who just wants to save his damsel and all that. For me, those are internal voices or versions of ourselves that could be. And to me, the moment you approach the mirror, for it to actually reflect something, there has to be just one thing for it to reflect. It cannot reflect multiple versions of you at once because only one really exists. And so to me, it's like the shards get reabsorbed into the mirror. Because again, the mirror doesn't have fractures. The mirror isn't lacking any pieces. It's whole. So to me, they get reabsorbed, which allows you to see the reflection. That's how I think of that bit.
counterpoint the hero later, and potentially the contrarian also. Not disproving, but like putting a wrench into this nice theory. Because how do you explain that?
I think I can still make it make sense if we bring the narrator into the fold.
Yeah.
The problem is we cannot talk about
That bit too much.
the wrench. We cannot talk about the wrench that you mentioned without talking about the endings. Not sure we want to go there.
There are certain pieces, potential endings that just kind of convolute this, but I think this is also part of this game's charm because it allows you to make these theories.
Exactly.
But it also makes it, like, it offers multitude. I like your idea with the reabsorption, and I get where you're coming from.
And also, I'm very much of the opinion that the narrator is acutely aware that there is, in fact, a mirror. And that it is not, in those instances, a mirror. It just looks like one.
Interesting.
It is my belief, spoiler warning, for the nature of the narrator. At the very end, when you have collected all the vessels that you need, and you go to meet the princess or the entity for the last time, before you do that, when you gaze into the mirror, something gazes back at you.
And it isn't you.
Exactly. It is, in fact, the narrator. And to me, like, he's looking at you through the mirror. And he tells you all about, you can ask him a bunch of questions. He tells you about what the setup is, the nature of this universe you're in, basically, and about your true nature and the nature of the princes and the princesses and all that. He tells you all about that, but he's speaking to you through this mirror, right? So he's looking at you through the mirror, and you are looking at him through the mirror, which is not what a mirror does, right?
True.
And just visually, as well as conceptually, but like visually, just from that standpoint, he's residing in the mirror, right?
Hey, smash or pass?
Smash or pass. Yeah, you can literally smash a pass. Anyway.
It's an intense scene in general, but I think in this case, I mean, the mirror is more of a, like, the in-between what the narrator created and what you are, basically.
I think the window, I think the mirror that we see there and the mirrors that we see in the cabins are actually windows. And I think they might be where the narrator peers in from.
That is also fun, because didn't the hero once say the narrator never described windows?
Yeah.
I mean, that is interesting. Yeah. I give you that.
Like, he might not want us pointing out that there is a mirror because there's a certain risk that we might see him in the mirror if that's where he's looking in through, right? Maybe that's playing into it.
I mean, I do stand by my own point that I don't think he sees them, because I feel like his actual abilities are limited, and this is just one instance where you're actually aware that he is unable to see everything. But
I'm not so sure, because every time I remember where he goes, there is no mirror. Like, every time where you insist there is a mirror, he goes, there is no mirror, which is when the mirror disappears.
It doesn't disappear then. He says there is no mirror. People are like, no, there is one. And usually when you try to...
No, then you approach it.
Yes, you approach it, or you try to touch it, and then it goes...
And you touch it, and then his narration usually goes to something along the lines of...
You look like an idiot for trying to touch a wall. Or...
Yeah, or you blah blah blah, you reach for a mirror that isn't there.
Not exactly, though. There's this one time, I don't know which route it was blocking a door, basically. So there was this instance where he goes, you fumble because you can try and bash the mirror in, basically, instead of, like, just touching it or something. And he goes, you bash your hand towards the door as if you didn't know where the handle is.
Oh yeah, right.
Did you actually not see it?
Yeah, I
like,
remember.
he was confused by this. So I'm like, I'm not 100% sure. I get your point, and I think this is a good theory. I'm not saying... I don't know, you know?
Yeah, me neither.
To me, there were instances where I'm like, no, I actually believe that he doesn't know, because if he did know, he would act differently, because he acts like so weird sometimes about shit that he cares about.
Fair.
I think he just doesn't like the fact that they're reacting to something that he is not aware of.
He's not able to perceive.
Because he's supposed to be in control.
That's fair.
It's also why he was so angry. But I mean, like when the princess talks to him, he always gets very, no, you're not supposed to talk to me. Why? No, please, no. Kind of deal. But I do agree, it could potentially just be a ploy, and I like the window theory, but at the same time, what we know as the narrator, well, the princess mentioned it before, is kind of just an echo. It isn't there. It's a multitude of potentials and trying to provide guidance to something that he isn't sure will be listening.
Yep.
So
an echo of what?
A bird.
An echo of a bird.
I mean, to be fair, we're also a bird, kind of.
Yep. What is it with the bird theme? That's actually something I have no clue. Like, maybe that's just an artistic choice, but I haven't been able to see any crazy significance in it.
I love all those descriptions. The tower calls you little birdie, which is horrible.
Yep.
You have the smitten going, no, let's rip up all our feathers to warm our princess. It's like, there's so many things, and you're just like, what
That's
the hell?
potentially one of the first hints that you get that you are a bird-like creature,
Yes.
where the smitten just goes, let's rip out all our feathers, and you go like, I'm sorry, what?
To be fair, if you look at your hand, such a small detail, I love that when you pick up the knife, the mouse cursor goes from being a hand to holding the knife.
Yes.
And it's even funnier when you're doing the contrarian, and then it's like, let's hold the knife differently, and then you do so, and then it does the same with the cursor, and then you throw it out of the window, and then you don't have a knife anymore.
Oh my god, that's great.
There are all these
I never
details.
paid attention to it changing when he said hold it differently. That's great.
If you actually say hold it differently, you will hold it differently in the cursor.
That's fantastic. I love the attention to detail.
Also, if you actually stab it, the knife is going to be bloody.
Yeah, I did notice that.
There are all these little details, and I absolutely threw everything away again. Let's go back to the narrator.
No, it's
Sorry.
all good. It's all good. Let's throw the narrator into the bin.
Oh my god, throw him out of the window.
But like you said, he's an echo.
Yes.
And I mean, he's described as such.
Yes.
By himself, by the princess in various instances. I'm asking you, an echo of what?
I mean, I said before an echo of a bird, but basically he, as a bird person, I guess, was very afraid of death in general. And I'm gonna do some spoilers now.
Yeah, sure.
He is a being that does not like the concept of death and how it ruins the world, basically, in his eyes.
Because dying sucks. Nobody likes to die.
Yeah.
That's basically his angle.
Yes.
Wouldn't it be great if nobody ever had to die anymore?
Exactly, and what he does is he creates two beings. One being that is all of this change, all of this death potential. And he creates a being that has the ability to destroy all of that, if we're going to be very simple about it. And
Yep.
to put them into a multitude of existences, realities, and all of it is basically putting them into a little box where they can play through everything and ensure that in the end death will be destroyed, change will be reduced. But to do so, you need a lot of power, a lot of strength, and a lot of other stuff. Basically, the narrator is aware that he will have to die for this. To die to save the world from death. And the only thing he leaves behind to make sure that his little experiment after creating two godlike beings, that they actually do what they're supposed to do, is to give the entity that is meant to kill the other entity and has the ability to kill the other entity a guiding voice.
Enter the narrator.
And then there's me, and then you have a contrarian, and like everything was fucked up.
Yeah.
Hooray! But it is interesting because it isn't just a box that is nothing. These boxes are always within a world, and whatever world this box is in, if things go wrong, that world still ends. He says that multiple times throughout the game, that these other worlds are still ruined.
And even
These actions have consequences, and that is probably true.
the mound acknowledges as much. To her, it's inconsequential that these worlds end, because she's like, well, if a world ends, another one is born, and that's just how things go. No biggie.
I think this is also one of the reasons why we both are like, we don't really agree with the narrator, because even though, yeah, death kind of sucks in concept, it is part of nature in a way, and like this idea that this natural part of life if we are going with this like cycle and change and stuff that is the shifting moon. It is weird to try and destroy it, which is, I think, why we both are like, I don't really agree with your goals.
Yeah. And I mean, it's his fault, it's his hubris at the end of the day that made it so there are two different entities, one representing change and one being there to slay the concept of change. It's his fault that this even happens. And so this is a very unnatural order of things. Had he left things alone, these weird things that we go through would never be happening. The worlds would just exist like they always have, presumably. And, people would be born and die and so on and so forth on the grand cosmic scale. He made it weird, essentially.
He made it weird. But I do agree. His goals aren't mean-spirited or malicious or anything like that. But he is very desperate and, I say, narrow-minded, I guess.
Yeah.
And his echo, well, it is just that. It's just the leftover of all of his hopes and dreams and fears and everything. And
yeah,
I do feel bad for him.
To me, it's like, is this too obvious for you? Is this too much of a low-hanging fruit to talk about? But to me, I'm like, oh, hell yeah. Death of the author taken to the fucking extreme. I love it. Because the narrator describes himself as the echo of the thing that created the setup, basically.
That's a good one.
And on a metatextual level, who did create the setup? The author did. Like, the actual author of the narrative did. And what is a narrator? What is the voice that narrates a book or a story in general, if not the echo of the author? And like the author, the echo can't control how you respond to the narrative. It can lead you a certain way.
I was about to say, it just reminds me of writers that go, I didn't mean to do this, but the characters went out of hand and then this just happened. Like, this is basically this.
I mean, yes and no. Yeah. And like, to me, it's very, very intrinsically linked to like this idea of the death of the author.
Fun.
The idea that
That's so good.
When you write something, you cannot control how it will be received. Even if you have a very clear intention with the thing you are writing, and you want this to go a certain way, you want it to be received and perceived a certain way by your readers, you are never in control of how your text gets received. And this is that taken to the utmost extreme, where the narrator is literally that. And I just love that. I love that so much.
It's a lot of fun. That's like so many good points.
You can see, you can pick this game apart so many different ways. You can talk about it on a meta level, you can talk about it just for what happens in the individual routes. It's just, this game is a lot. It gives you a lot of stuff.
One of my favorite bits regarding the narration, I mentioned it like outside of recording, how the narrator tries to not be part of the story. Again, just to be the narrator, right? Just I tell you what you're doing and they're doing it. And I don't have, like, this is it. But due to our choices and what is happening, the narrator very much is part of the story. Again, you have the smitten say, now describe our steamy kiss, please. Like, you have them clearly interacting with one another. You have the princess acknowledging the existence, or like having a dialogue as well sometimes. They're not just out there and telling us and we follow. No, they're part of the story, even though they don't want to be.
Yeah, you're right. It's very much like this thing where you described where an author goes, my characters are kind of talking to me, they are telling me what to do.
Or again, you wanted to write a chapter where at the end of the chapter something is happening, but while writing, the character did something different, because no, they wouldn't act like this immediately.
They wouldn't do that.
I mean, it's not the same, but I was reminded of this, where it's like, no, I had a structure, I had a goal. They were supposed to slay the princess, but no, there was this inner voice, you know?
Yeah, I think that's actually exactly what's happening in a way. I think in a way the game is a representation of that process.
It's really fun. I didn't look at it as much from this perspective as just like how it is conceived and written. I was like thinking a lot more different themes, but it is a fun point to make, and I do agree with you. Like, it's absolutely hilarious, though.
Yeah.
I really like the way you can have the narration be just this outside force. Again, if you just believe what the narrator says, you get a very straightforward experience. A very quick one as well.
And a nice drawing at the end.
Yes, and you're happy. But if you actually engage with it, you get like a lot more nuance to it. I mean, I say like the narrator, he goes from just saying you're on a path in the woods to saying, I would like to jump off a bridge right now. Or, wait, I have one line where it's like very clear that the narrator is not happy with you. It's like the different ways of, like, the description of a setting, identification, like just summarizing what it is and stuff. And then there's the commentary. And commentary is usually separated into interpretation, judgment, or generalization. And you get so much judgment from the narrator, which is always the best form of commentary. There was this one where it's like, I'm setting the stage. The room is empty because you made a spiteful, idiotic, and an all-around foolish decision.
Oh, yes.
Like, this is the description that you're given, and this is clearly not just the description of the setting as he is implying. He clearly makes a judgment about your choice. He clearly interacts with you on a different level than just saying, the room is empty.
Yep.
No, the room is empty because you were a spiteful, idiotic bird.
Thing.
Exactly. You decide how much the narrator influences or doesn't influence the story and how much power he has. How much he gets to decide is your decision. Which is why he always hates me. But it's also why I like to interact with him.
That's so good.
But as what he is as an echo, I say in the story, it is kind of sad because we never get to know the real thing. And the piece, like the being that we see at the end, this echo, is very much aware that there were potential outcomes for this, that it couldn't work out, that it wasn't set. That's also why that thing was aware that multiple worlds could end, and is aware of the potential of the loops. But every time they meet, he hopes he is the first one.
Yep.
It's really sad. I do feel bad for him. Like, I can't hate the narrator because of that. It's like actually like trying to do something and hoping for the best, but also falling to despair because your characters are a bit too overpowered. It's certainly something. Also, I still have to say, he does describe the kiss. And that's a fun one because he sounds so annoyed with what he does. And everyone's like, he is mocking us. He's mocking us for this. And he goes on and Smith is like, I don't care if he's mocking us. This is the good stuff. And then the narrator goes, I know, I'm good at what I'm doing. Like, it's such a good interaction. The narrator, or the piece that we have, is in such a bad spot, but still tries to give it its all, basically. It's an interesting concept. And in that regard, I have to say I dislike the shifting mount more, even though I listened to it first because I like to defy the narrator. But I think both of them are wrong because both of them want to control us.
Yep.
It's very much frustrating.
Yep.
Because the shifting mount doesn't care about us as a being, it only cares about us, the player, because we are meant to be more. And I don't like that. I think we're more than that.
And because we are meant to make her whole and set her free, basically.
Sure. This game has a lot to offer.
Hashtag not a video game, but a visual novel, go play it.
Yeah, sure. I mean, I got all the achievements. It was worth it.
That is crazy. I haven't gotten all of them yet, but good damn job.
It gets you to think if you actually want to, or it lets you deconstruct the damsel if you don't.
Yep. Deconstruct the damsel. That could be like a new, feminist sort of book. Deconstruct the damsel.
Yeah, no, there's so much. And I really have to say, I like all the interactions that the princess gets with the narrator. Because it basically finally offers them a dialogue that they just don't get to have.
Yeah.
Because we're the only ones who hear him, and every chance... I mean, it usually isn't the best situation for the narrator when these things happen, but it's like the only chance for them to actually interact with one another. Which is weird, because both of them, like, try to use us. And they keep doing so, but they don't really interact with one another otherwise. Which is always so powerful when the princess starts narrating stuff. It's like, oh no.
Yep.
We gave her a bit of power. That's not a good sign.
Yeah, when the princess starts narrating, you know shit is going down. It's like, oh, okay, this is...
She does in certain tower routes. I'm pretty sure in the Wraith she does.
Mm-hmm.
I mean, in the wild, I mentioned it before. I'm not sure. But yeah, at least 3. And I mean, she does other stuff in other routes. Like, the Nightmare is very, very much fun.
Mm-hmm.
I don't even know what to say.
Well, I'd say that's a pretty good indication that we should probably wrap this up. That was some good stuff. Both the game and this discussion, I had a very good time with it.
Yeah, I mean, thank you for sharing some thoughts.
Well, that's what we're here to do, aren't we?
I assume so. I still do apologize for throwing everything out of the window, but it was fun.
It was very fun. Thank you.
Are you gonna do the outro?
Do we have an outro?
I mean...
Do I have an outro? Thing is, we are in the process of trying to figure out where we are going to throw our stuff and what platform we might want for any shared endeavours, and we haven't figured that out yet. But, either way, thank you all for listening to this episode of Pore Overthink. I have been Sherigan.
I'm Mischief.
And we will be back with a new and hopefully just as exciting installment in about a month. And you can find us on, well, you've already found this podcast, so you can find us wherever this podcast is for the time being. You can find myself on twitch.tv/SheriganLP. You can find Mischief. Well, where can people find you?
I'm at the cabin in the woods.
Cabin in the woods.
Yeah.
Awkward now.
Bye.
Bye.
I'll fix it in post.
Let's fix it in post and then throw it out the window for good measure.
We threw a lot out the window.